The AKG K3003 has always been that elusive earphone that I hear about a lot when it comes to online discussion on earphones of the yesteryear that people really enjoyed. Back in 2011, it was the first big brand earphone that utilizes both dynamic drivers and balanced armature drivers in the same housing, and it was widely available enough to provide audiophiles around the world a glimpse of what hybrid design entails for the future of head-fi audio. Not only did the K3003 set the precedence for the immense potential in hybrid designs, it was also highly innovative in the fact that it was designed with customization in mind in the form of swappable audio filters that users can pick depending on their personal preferences. Together with its high build quality and exquisite appearance, the K3003 easily became one of the benchmarks in the price range that was at the time considered as high-end market. Fast forward to the present time, the K3003 is still highly regarded as the reference sound in some people's mind. In fact, if you can read Chinese, be it traditional or simplified, you'll see the name of this earphone popping up every once in a while. Some swear by this earphone, and even if a lot of people have already moved on since then, they will still reminiscent over the good old times they had with this earphone, in the same manner they reminiscent over things like the Sony MDR EX1000 and the Ultimate Ears 555. As for me, I actually never bought this earphone back in 2011 because it was so expensive at the time, and I never had one since then. But just like the EX1000, this earphone is something I have always wanted for a very long time because I want to see what all the fuss is about. And thankfully in May 2018, I was lucky enough to purchase a pair on discount for my own, and the one I got is actually the limited edition with champagne gold casing as well as white cabling. With this earphone finally in my hands, I'll examine every aspect of this earphone as a full product, from the packaging, accessories, build quality of the earphone, and most importantly, its sound quality, as well as compatibility with modern third-party ear tips. And through this video, I want to answer a single question: has the K3003 stood the test of time as the hybrid king of the yesteryear? This is Earphoneus Fanaticus, and here I present you my in-depth review of the AKG K3003. Let's start with the packaging. On the cover, there's an image of the earphone, but in my case, it is covered up by labels. But regardless, the cover reads K3003 LE, Latte Gold. The LE designation means this is a limited edition earphone. Keep in mind this earphone is marketed as reference class in-ear earphone by AKG, because later on we will examine its sound quality and determine if it is truly worthy as a reference earphone. The sides of the box are actually not very interesting, but flipping to the back does reveal some information regarding the earphone. As mentioned before, this is indeed a hybrid earphone with 2 BA handling the mids and highs, as well as 1 dynamic driver for delivering lower frequencies. AKG was actually not the first company to provide hybrid earphones, but it did help promote the design because AKG is such a well-known brand compared to the more obscure companies that nobody heard of. The casing is made of stainless steel and aluminium, so you can imagine this earphone is probably quite exquisite on hand. They also mentioned the acoustic filters, which can be fitted onto the earphone for sound tweaking, and I'll talk more about this later. There is more product information on the bottom, but there are only a few items I want to talk about. Firstly, the range of frequency response is 10Hz to 30 kHz, which is quite a bit larger than the common 20Hz to 20 kHz. But it is not quite high-res certified because it doesn't extend to 40 kHz. Of course, anything above 20 kHz is practically useless to us, so we should instead focus on the lower boundary of 10 Hz. In theory, this means we should get better bass extension and deeper rumble, but the frequency response range is really hard to determine concisely, so we should take the 10 Hz as a grain of salt and verify with our own testing. Impedance is rated at 8 ohms, so to drive this earphone properly, we need the output impedance to be as low as 1 ohm. Sensitivity is rated at a mind-boggling 125 decibels, so coupled with the 8 ohm impedance, this earphone demands the best output source available, and we should expect this earphone to be relentless towards hissing noises in poor sources. We should also expect it to be extremely loud compared to other earphones out there. Now because my K3003 is the limited edition, my packaging might be different from the regular version, I'm not really sure. But regardless, we just need to pull out the black box inside, which turns out to be just a wrapping for the actual box. The wrapping itself is really tight, so it takes a lot of effort just to pull out the box. Now the box opens with a black ribbon on the right, and this is where you will find the earphone. You can also find a piece of metal that reads AKG EST1947, Vienna, as well as the serial number for your earphone. So there are supposed to be only 3003 pairs, and this is the 2708th pair. By now we can also find a piece of fancy paper that turns out to be an application form that allows you to engrave something on your limited edition K3003. It even allows you to choose between Times New Roman, Seagull script, and Arial. I'm slightly disappointed that I can't pick Comic Sans. Now something I mentioned during my K3003 unboxing video is that you can see this product is really supposed to be premium, and one way you can see this is from this piece of black foam. This thing honestly serves no purpose other than to hold your earphone and a piece of metal plate, but the texture and feel of it is still really nice. This isn't necessary at all, but I like it. Now pulling out the black foam reveals some booklets, a metal holder for the acoustic filters, a champagne gold airline converter, a black box with many stock white silicone tips in small, medium and large, as well as a really beautiful carrying case. I have to confess, this has to be the best carrying case I've ever had my hands on. It's got this fine texture together with a gorgeous cream white color that just makes it so much more premium than what it probably is. The AKG logo and the words K series are also debossed onto the case. And naturally, with this being a white case, it gets dirty quite easily too. Now opening up the case could actually be a little bit difficult for some because of its large clamping force, but inside we can find a white silicone piece with slots that are designed for storing your K3003. Now if you pull the ribbon up top, you can actually just pop out the whole piece. On hand it feels smooth and delicate, which once again speaks to how premium this whole package actually is. Unfortunately, I found this silicone piece to be a huge pain in the arse to use. Here I have my K3003 already fitted on it, so when I do want to use my earphone, I need to undo the looping around the piece. It's really cumbersome and just so difficult to do, especially if you're on a crowded train trying to balance yourself without bumping into other people. And of course, when you're done using the earphone, you have to reverse the whole process and repeat the whole cycle the next time you use it. Besides, the audio jack doesn't really go anywhere after you're done wrapping the cable simply because there is not enough room in the grooves. Now naturally, the fact that this case is white already deters me from using it, but if you really want to use it, here's what I recommend you do instead. So I have my earphone in a circle, and then I open up the case, but wait, the silicone is gone. What shall I do? Well, I just dump the whole thing into the case and it's already done. No fiddling like a madman. There's even space for a small pack of silica gel. By the way, the silicone attracts dust really easily, so store it well if you do decide to take it out from the case, which any sensible audiophiles should do. Now let's finally check out the star of the show, the AKG K3003. Without a doubt, this is one of the most beautiful earphones in my collection. Each earphone housing is chiseled from one piece of brushed stainless steel, decorated by white ear tips and the white cable that loops around the housing. Inside the small housing, AKG is able to fit two balanced armature drivers right inside the sound tube, as well as a dynamic driver behind the BA stack. If you remove the ear tip, you can actually unscrew the top of the sound tube, which turns out to be the sound filter. The one that is fitted onto the earphone by default is reference sound, and behind it is the BA stack I mentioned just now. The rest of the filters can be found on this metal holder, which includes bass boost and high boost. The way they work is that there are specially designed holes behind the metal mesh which dampens certain frequencies, which in return makes it seem like some frequencies are boosted. You can imagine bass boost basically means high frequencies are dampened, while high boost means no dampening at all. To use them, you just screw them back onto the sound tube. You've really got to admit, AKG has done something truly amazing with the physical design here. Not only is the casing beautiful to look at, they were even able to fit 3 drivers in such a tiny space. There's however one major flaw in that the cable is actually not swappable, meaning when the cable does break, this earphone would be dead forever. This is really odd and unpardonable considering the price of the earphone, but I think a possible reason why they didn't go with swappable cable is that it would take up a lot of space, which increases the size of the otherwise earbud-like form factor. Personally, I don't mind bigger earphones, so I much prefer swappable design. Another issue I have with the physical design is that because the earphone is so small, it can't actually cover up the space near your ear canal, meaning sound isolation suffers quite a bit, though not as serious as the EX1000 and its crazy wind noise. Moving on to the cable, this section is just plastic, but there is a champagne gold metal piece that reads AKG on one side. This is actually where you would engrave the text we mentioned earlier. Going down more, we can see a golden wide split that seems to be quite smooth to use. Beyond this point, the outer sleeve changes to cloth, and near the end there's a white label that says "Designed in Austria", as well as a straight angle 3.5mm audio jack. I have to admit, I never liked straight angle jacks because it just never works well for me. When I put my player in my pocket and sit down, the cable always have to bend 90 degrees upwards, which is absolutely horrifying because this is applying so much force onto this fragile jack that if you keep doing this every day for the next year or so, I can guarantee you this part will just break and you can say goodbye to your fancy gold earphone. You can even see the significant bending on my cable here. Now supposedly the cable sleeve is made of a sort of tangle-free material, and in practice it does seem to work quite well as long as you also make use of the wide split. But not only is the cable tangle-free, it is also really stubborn. Before making this video, my K3003 has been stored in this carrying case for quite a long time, and when I finally took it out, because the cable was bent at a certain angle for so long, I just couldn't get rid of those bends entirely, and when I walk around without the cable completely hidden in my pocket, it would just bounce up and down in this almost spring-like motion in front of my body. That's just not cool to have. I want to look cool in the public, damn it. Of course, earphones aren't supposed to just look cool. For them to be considered good, they need to perform at the highest level as expected of their price range. When this earphone was first released back in 2011, the MSRP was a jaw-dropping $1,499. Yikes. Now I purchased mine for 5,759 Hong Kong dollars, of course, or $735, but the regular silver version goes for only $600 here in Hong Kong, meaning it is less than half of its original price. So what does $600 get you in the audio world? Or rather, is the K3003 worth $600? In the following section, I will analyze the sound signature and then the sound quality of this earphone. These impressions are done with my on-cue DP-X1A as my audio source with ACG mode turned on, log range adjust at +2, and digital filter set to sharp. In the past, this section was always done with my older DP-X1, and even though I did use the same settings as before, the results could be very slightly different considering the DP-X1A is indeed a little bit better sounding. The earphone itself is fitted with the reference sound filter and the stock medium-sized silicone tips. Let me start from the base. If you remembered, AKG actually rated the lower boundary for the K3003 at 10Hz, which is around 5 to 10Hz lower than most other earphones at the time and even now. And I'm happy to report the K3003 is indeed able to reach 10Hz under normal listening volume in a quiet room, while 20Hz is very much audible. This means the K3003 is indeed capable of playing sub-bass at a reasonable level, unlike something such as the on-cue E900M or UE900. Granted, the sub-bass is quite subtle, but it is very much audible. Moving on to mid-bass, there is a noticeable hump which results in rich and body bass. Though I wouldn't say it's always punchy, it really depends on the soundtrack you're listening to. This is due to the fact that the sub-bass is so much weaker than the mid-bass that most of the time you know you can hear the bass, but it's just kinda there, and it only punches you every once in a while. At first, I felt slightly mixed about this kind of tuning because I generally prefer less mid-bass and more sub-bass, but after listening to it for the first few days, I found myself enjoying it more than hating it. So overall, I would say AKG has done a great job with this bass tuning, though I still think it would have benefited if the very low registers are just a few decibels higher. Something else to point out is that, just like the Dunlop K3001, during testing the bass did not rattle or buzz at all, which probably means the dynamic driver is mounted really well, or the driver is of high quality. Moving on to the mids, I have to say AKG has done a fantastic job for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because of the mid-bass hum that I mentioned earlier, part of it actually blends into the lower mids, which also results in tasteful, rich and emotional male vocals and cello. And by blending, I don't mean it bleeds into the lower mids and contaminates it. Instead, I would say this enhances it. Female vocal is blended as well. It never sounds shouty, it just sounds beautiful. Another thing is that vocals are never drowned at all, even during busy passages with multiple instruments going on. So this indicates to me that the 1 to 2 kHz region is not muted, like in so many Ultimate Ears earphones. No nasally and muffled vocals here. So overall, I don't really have much to say about the mids. I think what AKG did here is practically perfect. Unfortunately, my biggest problem with the K3003 in terms of sound signature actually comes from the high frequency response. Now as a preface, I want to say I am 100% a treble head. I love treble, lots of it. If an earphone isn't bright sounding, most of the time I won't even consider listening to it anymore, because to me, proper high frequency tuning is important to give the earphone a sense of analytical capabilities and excitement. How it is tuned also has some effects on vocals. Therefore, it shouldn't surprise you that most earphones that I like tend to be quite bright sounding, like the E900M. With that said, the keyword here is proper tuning, and I feel that the K3003 went a bit overboard here. By ears, I think there are two noticeable peaks at around 8 to 9 kHz, as well as from 13 to 14 kHz. I'm not sure which one is it, but I think the higher peak is a bit too much, so depending on the mastering and the instruments involved, the K3003 could sound piercing and show sibilance. And you have to remember this is coming from someone who really likes treble. Many people praise the K3003 for its supposedly reference or analytical signature, but I think a lot of it comes from these exaggerated peaks up top, which makes the K3003 bright sounding. And generally, people associate bright signature with reference signature. Now, if I use only this earphone for a few days and listen to it daily, the piercing feeling does eventually go away and sibilance becomes less noticeable. But this is merely just because my brain is adapting to it. I'm not enjoying it, I'm just tolerating it. This also means I cannot listen to the earphone for hours without feeling some kind of ear fatigue. Overall, I think AKG's reference approach on this earphone actually turns out to be a detriment to it, and it's really a shame. This earphone does perform really well in other registers, and depending on what you listen to, you might actually not even notice it. And I can tell you when the mastering is right, this earphone just sings. Of course, talking about the sound signature of this earphone could prove to be slightly tricky, because if you use a different filter on it, it will be different. So here's a brief rundown of how I feel about the other filters. To me, high boost is completely overkill considering how bright the earphone already is, and it doesn't actually boost those frequencies that needed boosting. It just makes the existing peaks shoot up even more. But if this is the case, the bass boost filters must be exactly what I need, right? Well, yes and no. While the bass boost filters do inhibit sibilance, it also weakens other peaks that you actually want to keep. And I found that with these filters, cymbals just don't sound very realistic. And if you listen to electronic notes a lot, all of a sudden you'll find those notes to be dull and not electronic-like. Another thing I noticed is that this earphone actually becomes perceivably softer, and this encourages you to turn up the volume, and as you do, you will hear more of the bass and mids, and the darker, thicker sound signature is even further from the reference sounds branding by AKG. though I suspect this is actually the kind of treble most people like. I've heard treble like this on an extremely popular pair of high-end earphones, and to my surprise, people actually regard this kind of treble to be crystal clear. Like, how? Now, something I find kind of funny as I was messing with the filters is that if you have a pair of N5005, which is the current flagship from AKG, you can actually put the high boost filters onto the K3003, but the other filters won't fit because there's a plastic bit on the inner side that interferes with the bore of the balanced armature drivers. Of course, this isn't useful to us at all, but I just figured I might as well show you. Besides talking about sound signature, we also can't forget that sound quality is not defined by signature alone, but also how technical the earphone sounds, which can be really abstract. And this really isn't something your run-of-the-mill YouTube reviewers will tell you about, or maybe they don't even know it about themselves. So let's start with soundstage. I found the horizontal soundstage on this to be very narrow, and this is due to the proximity of the drivers to the ear canal. On the other hand, horizontal layering is actually decent, and you can somewhat tell where different musical elements are coming from in terms of direction, but because the soundstage is so small, I have a hard time separating sounds concisely from one another. What is concise though is how the earphone is able to give texture and shape to different musical elements. If you listen closely, you will indeed realize how much detail each vocal line or the strokes and reverberation of string instruments can have, and being able to identify these really is a treat. We talked about horizontal soundstage, but what about vertical? Well, because this earphone is so small, there's no room for tweaking the driver positions, and because the BA and dynamic drivers are firing in the same direction, which is horizontally into your ear canal, there's really no vertical soundstage or layering to speak of, meaning you will not hear sounds from above and below, so to speak. But that's okay, not many earphones exhibit vertical layering anyway. One final but small point I want to mention is that by ears, I can only detect around 66 decibels of dynamic range on this earphone, which puts it on the same level as the OnQ E900M. This is honestly quite mediocre, considering cheaper earphones like the Sony EX1000 and the Dunlop DK3001 are able to exceed 70 decibels. This means you might occasionally miss out on some very quiet sounds in the music, and to hear them you need to turn up the volume, but then the loudest sounds would likely become unbearable for you. But do keep in mind this is measured by ear only and should only be taken as a grain of salt. Overall, in terms of sound quality, I think the K3003 is more of a sound signature first kind of earphone rather than one that does both signature and technical abilities well. And I think this is largely due to the physical limitation of the earphone. Had they gone with a bigger body, they could have definitely tinkered more with driver positions, which would have ascended this earphone to an entire new level. The last section I want to focus on is ear tip compatibility. I have in my collection the SpinFit CP100, the double flange SpinFit CP220 and 230, Comply, JVC Spiral Dots and Sony Hybrids. Let's begin with the CP100. Compared to the stock tips, this one sticks out more by 3mm when put onto the earphone, which means you don't need to insert the earphone deeply into the ear canal for good seal. And because of this, horizontal soundstage actually widens slightly, but noticeably. I think the overall sound signature doesn't change much. It does seem the K3003 becomes a little bit manlier, so to speak, due to having more lower frequency presence. Also, vocals sound a little bit closer and richer. Overall, I would say this is a really good match for the K3003. Moving on to the CP230, it sticks out even more than the CP100 by 1mm, but because getting a proper seal is so much harder than the previous ones, you actually still need to insert them deeply into the ear canal, which is not very comfortable even for short listen. With these, the earphone actually turns thinner sounding because there is less bass and lower mids presence, and the vocals also become thinner, both of which are detrimental to the K3003 specifically. So this is not a good match at all. The CP220 is a similar story. It sticks out even more than the CP230 by 2mm this time around, and that's because the lower flange is just too short. With this, I also need to insert deeply, so comfort is not great, though getting a good seal is easier with this compared to the CP230. In terms of sound signature, it is just like the CP230. less bass and lower mid presence, but this time the earphone sounds a little bit airier. Overall, also not a good fit for the K3003. Now what is a good fit would be the Comply foam ear tips. When put onto the earphone, the total length is the same as CP100 at 2.3 cm. It seals really well, and the earphone sounds really good as well, with most of the benefits of CP100 except for soundstage. Another good thing about this ear tip is that it does also take the edge off the sibilance. However, Comply is plagued with problems like the ear tip itself disintegrating relatively quickly, generally big size which makes it less comfortable for the ear canal, and they lose the memory foam properties when they encounter moisture without proper drying afterwards. I would suggest using these with caution. The last two I tried were the JVC Spiral Dots and the Sony Hybrids. Unfortunately, neither of them fits the K3003. The Spiral Dots is just too short, while the Sony Hybrid is just too tight for the sound tube. So to summarize, the SpinFit CP100 and the Comply are great fits for the K3003. And personally, I would take the CP100 over the Comply because of the wider soundstage and drastically better longevity. So I've said a lot of things about the K3003. I talked about the packaging, the accessories, physical design, and most importantly, the sound quality of this earphone. With the regular version at just $600 US, what's my final verdict? Honestly, I think a lot of this really comes down to what top of the line earphones you have heard before. If this is your first time climbing to the mid-tier which this earphone sits at according to the currently obesely inflated price ranges, you'll be dazzled by the sound signature of this earphone. With this interesting take on bass tuning, appropriately rich lower mids and practically perfect higher mids, there is surely a lot to love about this earphone. And while the sibilance in high frequencies can be unbearable occasionally, it can be somewhat alleviated by using third-party ear tips, and the sound filters provide another way you can physically tweak the sound without resorting to equalization. Besides, if you let your brain kind of get used to those treble peaks, you might even appreciate this kind of bright tuning. That was the case for me, and I even found myself rolling back to some really old music in my collection, enjoying how this earphone would have presented them had I purchased it back in 2011. Unfortunately, having auditioned so many earphones, some that are just a little bit more expensive than the K3003's price, I can't help but realize that in terms of sheer technicality, this earphone is showing its age. I'm sure back in the days, its sound signature alone would have easily swayed many people, thinking it is indeed worthy as the king of the hill. But the year is now almost 2019, and the audiophile community has expanded so much. We don't focus on just sound signature alone, because there are so many earphones out there that could potentially exhibit a signature at a much lower price. So to definitively call out an earphone as the true hi-fi king, we need to assess things like soundstage, imaging, shaping, etc. And frankly, the K3003 is lacking in a lot of those things. I think the Achilles heels here is the small casing. To achieve such a small size, sacrifices have to be made, and in this case, the limitation to driver positioning straight up eliminates vertical layering, and their proximity to the ear canal means horizontal soundstage suffers as well. But let us not forget that this earphone was released in 2011, meaning this design is almost 8 years old. A lot of innovations have popped up during all these years, some more questionable than the others, but regardless, it is just unfair to pit this against the flagships of today. This belongs to the past, and in the past, it was the pioneer, it was a crazily expensive benchmark, and it was glorious. If what you're after today is sound quality, I think there are indeed better options out there, but as part of my IEM collection, I think this is very cool to have, and it's nice to be able to take it out for a spin every once in a while and marvel at what we have achieved today. So that's it for this review. What do you guys think about this earphone? If you own it or have tried it before, leave your thoughts in the comment section below. If you have any questions regarding this earphone, of course you can leave that in the comments too. Drop a like and subscribe for more earphone reviews and unboxing in the future. This has been Earphoneus Fanaticus, and I'll see you in the next video.